Hey there, weary traveler. Welcome to this quiet little corner of history. Before we set off on our journey back to the harsh winters of the medieval world, let me extend a warm welcome to you, dear listener. Whether you're curled up under the blankets, drifting towards sleep, or simply here to relax with some gentle storytelling from the past, I'm truly glad you've joined me tonight. If you'd like, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how many different places and people gather here, united by a love of history. And if you enjoy these calm, immersive tales of the past, don't forget to tap that subscribe button so you'll be here for the next chapter. But for now, let's leave behind the noise of the modern world and step into a time long ago. A time when winter's icy grip was far more dangerous than most of us today could ever imagine. Picture yourself in the medieval countryside. The last autumn leaves have already fallen. The sun hangs low on the horizon, its faint light doing little to push back the bitter chill in the air. Frost crunches underfoot as the wind carries the first hints of snow. Winter is coming, and for the people of this age, that meant one thing above all else: hardship. The cold arrives gently at first, but it lingers for months, seeping into every crack and crevice. Soon, the land will be covered in a blanket of white, rivers and ponds frozen into mirrors of ice. In an era before central heating or insulated homes, warmth was a luxury only the wealthy could count on. Of course, it wasn't always quite this brutal. In earlier times, the seasons followed a steadier rhythm. Snow came and went, expected and endured, but rarely feared. Then something shifted. The climate itself began to change, bringing about a period that would later be called the Little Ice Age. From the 14th century all the way into the 19th, winters grew colder and harsher than anyone could remember. The reasons behind this change are still debated, but its effects were unmistakable. Crops failed, livestock perished, families shivered as relentless winds swept across the land. One of the most striking examples of this era was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures dropped so low that rivers and lakes across Europe froze solid. In London, even the River Thames turned into a frozen highway. Markets sprang up right on the ice, with stalls, shops, and even fires burning on the river's surface. It was a surreal sight, yet behind the novelty lay real suffering. Countless people died in their homes that winter, unable to keep out the deadly cold. And yet, even in times of struggle, there were those who managed to find an odd sort of opportunity in the frost. One such person was a young Isaac Newton. At the time, he was a student at Cambridge University. When the Great Frost forced the school to close, Newton returned to his family's farm. There, sitting close to the fire with endless hours of quiet, he began to think deeply about the mysteries of the universe. It was during this unexpected pause in his studies that Newton started developing some of his most groundbreaking ideas, the very foundations of the theories that would change science forever. Newton's quiet winter reflections eventually grew into the great works of calculus and optics, but it makes you wonder how many other brilliant ideas throughout history might have been sparked in the stillness of a long, cold season. It serves as a reminder that even in the harshest times, the human spirit never stops searching for light. But for most people living in medieval Europe, winter wasn't a season to embrace. It was something to endure. The wealthy could cushion themselves against the cold with thick woolen cloaks, well-stocked pantries, and plenty of firewood. For peasants and serfs, who made up the majority of society, survival was an entirely different struggle. Picture yourself in a one-room cottage, waking in the dim gray of morning. The air is heavy with smoke from a struggling fire, and each breath escapes as a faint mist. You rise carefully from your straw-filled mattress, trying not to disturb the tightly packed forms of your family, who cling together for warmth. The chill presses in through the cracks of the walls, gnawing at your fingers and toes until they throb with pain. Breakfast, if there is any, might be a small bowl of thin porridge or a hunk of stale bread. The stores from the last harvest are dwindling, and you know the hardest months still lie ahead. Outside, even the animals suffer. Their coats are dusted with frost as they cluster together in the barn, steam rising from their breath as they fight off the freezing air. Later in the day, you set out into the snow, gathering what wood you can find. Each log feels heavier than the last, and the icy air cracks your skin until your hands are raw. But you keep going, because without fire, the night could claim your family. When you glance at your children, thin faces flushed with cold, eyes dulled by hunger, you know you have no choice but to press on. This was the harsh reality for countless families in the medieval world, an endless struggle against nature itself, every waking hour devoted to keeping death at bay. Yet, even amidst such relentless hardship, people found ways to hold on to resilience and even joy. Life in the Middle Ages was deeply tied to the turning of the seasons, and with each change came rituals and traditions that gave meaning to the struggle. Even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were sparks of celebration. One such moment came with the feast of St. Stephen, held every year on December 26th. For a single day, the rigid order of society loosened. A common laborer or serf might be chosen as the Lord of Misrule, given the honor of presiding over lively festivities filled with laughter, music, food, and drink. It was a rare day of indulgence in lives otherwise marked by scarcity. Still, the strongest symbol of hope in those long winters wasn't a feast or ritual. It was the act of coming together. Survival often depended on the strength of the community, and bonds of family and friendship were treasured above all. Picture a tiny village blanketed in snow. Smoke rises from chimneys, blurring into the heavy sky, each column a fragile sign of life. Inside cramped homes, families huddle around the fire, trading stories and sharing the little food they have. There's weariness etched into every face, but also a quiet determination. Neighbors brave the snow to check on one another, offering a bundle of wood or a pot of stew to those in need. In that dim firelight, though the cold gnaws outside, there's warmth of another kind, one born not of embers, but of unity. That quiet determination carried people through. They had faced countless winters before, and deep down, they believed they would survive this one too. And so, the long months dragged on, snow piling ever higher, ice spreading thicker with each passing day. Yet, even in the darkest stretch of winter, there was always a faint glimmer of hope. For medieval people knew one truth, above all else: spring would return. They watched carefully for the signs, the days stretching just a little longer, the snow beginning to soften underfoot, the earth loosening beneath the thaw. When the first green shoots broke through the frozen ground, it was more than a change of season. It was renewal, a promise kept. Plow Monday marked the official end of winter's hold, a day of both ritual and relief. Farmers hauled out their heavy plows, which had been idle for months, and brought them to be blessed in elaborate ceremonies. As the blades cut the first furrows into the soil, there was a palpable sense of joy, gratitude, and relief. Life had been brutally hard, marked by hunger, cold, and endless uncertainty, but they had endured. The return of spring wasn't taken for granted. It was celebrated with reverence. It's difficult for us, in a world of central heating, stocked supermarkets, and year-round convenience, to truly grasp the resilience it took to endure those endless winters. The thought of such hardship faced year after year is almost unimaginable today. And yet, there's something profoundly humbling in knowing that our ancestors did just that. They endured not with bitterness, but with a remarkable strength of spirit. They clung to hope in the bleakest of moments and found joy in the simplest things. This resilience is their legacy to us, a quiet reminder passed down through centuries. So, the next time you feel a chill on a winter's day, pause for a moment and think of them. Think of their struggle and perseverance, their fleeting joys and lasting sorrows. Remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through the harshest of nights. Because if there's one lesson the medieval winter still offers us, it's this: no matter how long the night, no matter how bitter the cold, spring is always waiting just beyond the horizon. And with that, dear traveler, we reach the end of our journey through the frozen landscapes of medieval Europe. I hope these stories of hardship, endurance, and resilience have given you a new perspective on the season. May you, like those who came before us, find comfort in the warmth of family and community, and may the promise of brighter days ahead light your way through even the coldest nights. Thank you for joining me here in this cozy corner of history. If you enjoyed our time together, I'd love for you to subscribe and share these tales with a friend. There are so many more journeys into the past waiting to be told. But for now, I'll leave you with a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another story from the ages. Sweet dreams. Even the wealthiest households were not spared from winter's cruelty. In royal castles, where grandeur often masked fragility, the cold presented a relentless challenge. Keeping an entire court warm and well-fed during the harshest months required staggering effort. Mountains of firewood had to be gathered and stored to keep the great hearths roaring, the only source of heat against the icy air that seeped through stone walls. In the kitchens, staff worked endlessly to salt, dry, and preserve meats, grains, and vegetables, ensuring supplies would last through months when fresh food was impossible to find. Servants rushed to plug cracks in doors and windows with straw, cloth, and wax, fighting to hold back the creeping chill. Yet even with all this preparation, nature often had the upper hand. One particularly grim tale illustrates the point. Chroniclers claim that Queen Elizabeth of Hungary met a tragic fate in January of 1326 when she was discovered frozen in her bed, perished from exposure within the very palace meant to protect her. Whether embellished or not, such stories reveal how death hovered constantly over medieval winters, sparing no one, not even royalty. But despite the season's cruelty, people clung to sparks of hope. For many, that glimmer came with the Feast of St. Stephen, held each year on December 26th. It was more than a holiday. It was a precious reprieve from endless drudgery and deprivation. On this day, life turned briefly upside down. At the heart of the celebration was the tradition of misrule. A commoner was chosen to become the Lord of Misrule, temporarily elevated above their social betters to preside over the revelry. With a mischievous grin, this unlikely ruler could issue playful commands, lead games, and stir laughter across the village. The rigid walls of the feudal orders softened, if only for a day, and everyone, lord, vassal, and serf alike, shared in the food, drink, and merriment. This inversion of power wasn't just entertainment. It served a deeper purpose. It offered a release valve for the frustrations of daily life, and more importantly, it reinforced the bonds of fellowship that were critical for survival. When the cold and hunger threatened to grind people down, these fleeting moments of joy and togetherness reminded them that they were not alone. One chronicle from 1377 tells a moving story of two neighboring peasant families. By midwinter, both had run out of provisions, staring down starvation long before spring would come. On the feast of St. Stephen, they chose to pool the last scraps they had left, sharing a meager meal together. That simple act of generosity gave them the strength and the will to survive the season's final trials. Compassion like this formed the backbone of medieval communities. In those bitter months, a single gesture could mean the difference between life and death. A log of firewood offered to a widow, a bowl of stew shared with a traveler frostbitten on the road, a blanket given to a neighbor. Winter's merciless grip demanded cooperation, knitting people together in ways that transcended even the rigid hierarchies of their world. And yet, no matter how warm the fellowship, the season itself pressed on. The cold was unyielding, the days short and bleak. Celebrations would fade, and the long misery of winter stretched endlessly before them. The feast of St. Stephen, for all its joy and revelry, was but a fleeting spark in the vast darkness of winter, a single flare of warmth before the long, unrelenting trudge through January, February, and March. As food stores dwindled, hunger gnawed, and the cold seeped, even past the most carefully tended hearths, the distant promise of spring felt like little more than a dream. And yet, somehow, year after year, medieval society endured. Against unimaginable odds, they clung to life, sustained by sheer grit, unshakable fortitude, and the fellowship born in winter's merciless forge. As the land slept and the sun withdrew, people dug deep, finding within themselves the stubborn will to carry on. One can only imagine the rush of joy when the first whispers of spring arrived, the air softening, daylight stretching just a little longer, the sharp, loud drip of melting icicles signaling winter's retreat. For those who had survived months of bitter trial, such signs must have felt nothing short of miraculous. For farmers, no day brought more relief than Plough Monday, the ceremonial start of the agricultural year, observed on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January. Though winter still held the land in its grip, this ritual was a powerful symbol of hope. The ploughs, idle for months, were blessed and prepared. Draft animals harnessed, the first clods of earth broken open in anticipation of the thaw. With each furrow turned toward the pale sun, people declared their resilience, pushing back, however tentatively, against the tyranny of winter. We, in the modern world, can scarcely comprehend the strength it took to endure such seasons. We have central heating, electric blankets, stocked pantries, and sturdy homes. Our complaints arise from delayed flights, traffic jams, or power outages that last only a few hours. From this vantage point of comfort, the true suffering of medieval winters is almost unfathomable, and yet, endure it they did. They not only survived, but found ways to carve out celebration and fellowship in the bleakest of times. That they could face such relentless deprivation and still seek moments of laughter, song, and unity feels nearly superhuman to us today. It is a lasting testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity the same spirit that rests within us, quiet but waiting, ready to be awakened when hardship demands it. So, the next time you feel the weight of modern inconveniences pressing on you, pause and reflect. Think of those who came before us, who braved the endless nights and merciless cold, who bore hunger and fear, yet held fast to hope. In remembering them, we might just learn to draw from our own hidden reserves of strength, resilience, and courage. As we rest today in our warm, comfortable beds, it's worth pausing to reflect on those who once endured winter's siege with little more than grit, endurance, and the bonds of fellowship. For them, survival relied not on technology or luxury, but on sheer willpower and an unshakable hope that brighter days would come. When the new year dawned and the Plough Monday rituals faded, life in medieval Europe slipped back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, dim days and long, bitter nights defined the season. Those with some means retreated into smoky cottages or drafty manors, eking out what comfort they could. But for the poor, each day was a battle against the cold, fought simply to survive. One of the harshest threats of winter was not the snow or frost, but sickness. Cramped, unsanitary living conditions created a perfect breeding ground for disease. Even a common cold, which today we brush off as an inconvenience, brought misery to families already weakened by hunger and cold. Far more dangerous, however, were illnesses like influenza and pneumonia. Influenza struck with fever, chills, and aching weakness, and in an age without medicine or vaccines, outbreaks could devastate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly catastrophic. A virulent wave of influenza swept across Europe, and in Paris alone, more than 10,000 lives were lost. Pneumonia, too, stalked the weary and malnourished. The dampness of winter seeped into frail bodies, filling lungs with fluid until the sufferer drowned slowly from within. In crowded one-room homes, the disease spread swiftly, sometimes claiming entire families and leaving behind orphan children and broken households. Even kings and queens were not beyond its reach. In fact, royal courts, with their constant stream of visitors, travelers, and pilgrims, often made perfect pathways for disease to spread. Henry VIII himself suffered the loss of his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, after childbirth complications, likely worsened by the unhygienic practices of the age. Of all those at risk, children bore the heaviest burden. Harsh weather, meager food, and unhygienic conditions combined to make winter especially deadly for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced grim odds. In London during the 1500s, nearly half of all children never lived to see their 5th birthday. One haunting tradition speaks volumes about the fragility of life at the time. The practice of bone lace. When a child became gravely ill, a black ribbon might be tied around their wrist. If the child passed away, that same ribbon would later be used to tie their burial shroud, a quiet, heartbreaking reminder of winter's toll on the most innocent. For families of limited means, winter's dangers were not just illness, but the daily struggle for warmth and food. Firewood was strictly regulated, with laws forbidding peasants from freely gathering wood from the forests. Many resorted to burning dried dung or straw to fuel their weak hearts. Families huddled close, often sharing their living space with shivering animals whose breath steamed in the icy air. Livestock, providing not just food, but what little warmth they could. Meanwhile, food stores ran low. By the heart of winter, meals had grown sparse and uninspired. A typical household survived on salted meats, dried peas, and coarse bread. The abundance of the autumn harvest was long gone, and the tender greens of spring were still months away. Foraging became essential. People combed the frozen landscape for whatever hardy plants they could find. Nettles, wild garlic, mushrooms. From these scraps, they brewed pottages, thick, simple stews of peas, beans, salted pork, and, if fortune allowed, a handful of foraged greens or wild onions for flavor. It was monotonous fare, bland and repetitive, but it sustained life through the lean months. And yet, even this humble subsistence was not guaranteed. Storms, droughts, pests, or poor harvests could turn a difficult winter into a catastrophic one. The most infamous example was the Great Famine of 1315. Relentless rains ruined crops across northern Europe, leaving fields waterlogged and useless. Chroniclers of the time recorded horrific scenes, starving families resorting to eating dogs, horses, even the flesh of the dead. Some desperate parents, unable to watch their children waste away, smothered them to spare them further suffering. Streets and fields were littered with unburied corpses, the sheer scale of death overwhelming communities. While this famine was extraordinary in its devastation, smaller shortages haunted medieval winters constantly. Survival was never assured. Every meal was a fragile triumph over hunger. But winter was more than just a struggle for food. It shaped every aspect of medieval life. With travel dangerous, daylight scarce, and labor limited, people turned inward, finding ways to pass the long hours. The warmth of festive Yule gatherings faded into quieter evenings spent indoors. Families huddled together, telling stories, singing songs, and finding comfort in one another's company. The glow of tallow candles or rushlights illuminated scenes of quiet industry. Women sewed or spun wool, men carved wood or mended tools. In an age where idleness was frowned upon, the devil's playground, as the saying went, winter at least provided time to attend to such tasks. For those fortunate enough to read, winter could also bring the rare pleasure of books. Literacy was uncommon, and books were precious treasures. A tradesman's modest library might include a Bible, a book of hours, or perhaps a few jesting tales of Robin Hood. The wealthy, meanwhile, collected illuminated manuscripts, lavishly decorated volumes that were as much works of art as they were texts. Reading was often a communal activity. A literate family member might read aloud so that all could enjoy the stories. Tales of knights and heroes, like those of King Arthur and his legendary court, were perennial favorites, their themes of honor and valor offering a welcome escape from the grimness of daily life. Of course, not all winter amusements were so noble. Gambling with dice was a common pastime, though it often led to heated arguments, and sometimes worse. Winter nights in medieval Europe echoed with the rattle of dice and the clatter of knucklebones. Taverns and great halls alike rang with laughter, cheers, and groans as fortunes were won and lost in games of chance. Gambling was a favorite diversion, but it carried risks beyond empty purses. Tempers flared quickly, and more than one friendly game ended in heated words or fists. Drink was another well-loved companion against the cold. Ale, mead, and wine flowed freely, warming bellies and loosening tongues. Public houses thrived in winter, offering fellowship and distraction from the chill outside. Within their smoky walls, songs grew bawdy, debates turned rowdy, and the occasional brawl broke out. Yet for many, such places provided a vital escape from the endless grind of survival. Not all turned to dice or drink for solace. Winter also lent itself to reflection and devotion. With the fields lying dormant, there was more time for prayer, penance, and charity. The church stood at the center of medieval life, and its influence was strongest in the stillness of the season. The lively nativity plays and Christmas pageants gave way to quieter acts of piety as winter deepened. Pilgrims braved icy roads to reach holy sites, their hardship worn as a badge of devotion. Others sat for hours in cold stone churches, whispering prayers and turning rosary beads with numbed fingers, contemplating not just the season, but eternity. Charity, too, was a sacred duty. The church urged the faithful to live out the 7 acts of corporal mercy: to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, comfort the sick, shelter the homeless, give drink to the thirsty, visit prisoners, and bury the dead. In the harshness of winter, even the smallest kindness, a loaf of bread shared, a log of firewood given, could mean the difference between survival and tragedy. Yet winter could bring out darker instincts as well. Scarcity bred desperation, and crime often spiked as hunger grew. Theft was common, and tempers, frayed by confinement indoors, led to quarrels and violence. The medieval justice system, creaking and slow, struggled to keep pace. Trials were frequently delayed until the weather eased, leaving the accused to languish in cold, overcrowded jails. Punishments, when they came, could be brutal: fines, floggings, even executions. Still, even in the bleakest months, people found ways to kindle sparks of joy. The promise of spring was never fully extinguished, and as the days lengthened ever so slightly in February, spirits began to lift. The feast of St. Valentine, celebrated on February 14th, was one such bright flame in winter's darkness. Originally a pagan fertility rite, it had long since been Christianized into a celebration of love and companionship. By the 15th century, the custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was already well established, a tender reminder that even in the harshest season, warmth of another kind could be found. And so, dear listener, we reach the end of our journey through the long, unforgiving winters of the Middle Ages. It was a world where hunger stalked every household, where sickness crept in with the cold, and where survival itself was an act of courage. Yet even in the bitterest nights, people clung to hope. They found strength in fellowship, joy in simple traditions, and meaning in faith and endurance. For us today, wrapped in the comfort of heated homes and modern convenience, it is humbling to reflect on the resilience of those who came before. Their struggles remind us that the human spirit has always been capable of weathering storms, both of snow and of circumstance. So the next time winter's chill seeps into your bones, pause for a moment. Think of the medieval men, women, and children who braved far harsher nights, and take comfort in the lesson they left behind, that no winter lasts forever, and spring is always waiting, just beyond the frost. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history's coldest season. If you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd be delighted if you subscribed and perhaps shared these stories with a friend. There are so many more tales waiting to be told, and I'd love for you to be part of them. Until then, stay warm, stay safe, and may the quiet strength of our ancestors light your way through even the darkest nights. Sweet dreams. And I'll see you next time.